I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a investment banker who's handled hundreds of billions of dollars. She used to be an assistant housing secretary at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. She is now the heart and soul and brains behind this. I won't just call it a publication. It really is a media organization, Solari Report, and this is her year-end wrap-up report, and it's very well done. It's glossy, highly printed, all kinds of information, graphs, analysis you can only find here. I always learn something when I interview Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, great show. Great show.
I want to. People may look at space exploration. Global investment takes off. Great. Space exploration. How does that affect me? Well, it affects you because they have done a lot of this space exploration, according to your report, with a lot of hidden black budget money in the trillions of dollars. Can you put those two together, space and why it affects you on Main Street?
I never expected to get into space-based economy, Greg, but I was just looking for all the money disappearing from the federal budget. So we have $8.5 trillion missing from the federal budget. We have $27 trillion of bailouts. I've talked a lot about the financial coup d'etat. And I think a lot of that money, after the Kennedy administration, we took the space program dark. So I think there's been a lot of money going into space or the industrial activities on planet Earth that you need to support that kind of space effort. Now it's becoming much more popular. And as part of rebalancing the global economy, what we've done is we're now seeing extraordinary investment in Asia, in Russia, in countries around the world in building space. Part of that is building the orbital platform because so much of the economy on Earth is coming from what's happening with satellites and things going on in the orbital and suborbital platform. But then beyond, we now have, I don't know if you saw the Boeing ad at the Super Bowl. Basically they showed a picture of life in 2116 with colonies on Mars. The latest speech from NASA, the director of NASA said he referred to Earth as our home planet. So it's clear we have plans underway to become a multi-planetary civilization, and it's one of the most important drivers in the economy, and it's amazing because it's so invisible to most people.
You were talking about the risk of doing this as well. You're saying that you pegged it at $1 trillion a year economy, which may be on the low side. I don't think you'd argue with me on that. But you said that there are risks of bankrupting, economies and countries doing this, and you gave up Scotland as an example when it tried to colonize what is now Panama in 1700. Tell me about how the risk about all this.
Yeah, so the Scots took an extraordinary amount of their capital and betted on becoming, a global presence, if you will, and it went wrong. And it's one of the reasons they folded into the United Kingdom in the 1700s. So this kind of exploration can bankrupt a society. And I have to say, I think right now it's not bankrupting us, but it is tearing us apart in terms of the secrecy and privilege. I think the secrecy and privilege is destroying our civilization, if you will. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about this, because we're coming into a reengineering of the federal budget. And if trillions of dollars have been stolen, I think that has to be on the table before we try and balance the budget on the backs of the people it's been stolen from.
Is this why Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, they're calling BS on the BS, and of all the things, let's start with Bernie Sanders. I don't believe in any of this whole socialist giveaway, deal, but I do believe he's right about the banks, and that's resonating, and it's scaring the heck out of the establishment. On the Democratic side, on the Republican side, Trump is, how do we make America great again? In other words, she's talking about how incompetent government is, or maybe criminal. Is that why these guys are resonating in both parties?
It's one of the reasons. So, as you know, I'm very concerned about the role that entrainment is playing and who's behind the scenes. But nevertheless, the reality is both the Trump campaign and the Sanders campaign have done a great deal to start to bring cracks to all that secrecy. And America is hungering for that because we have to get, the debt growth game is over. If you look at the debate over at the G20 or Davos, they're all saying the debt growth game is over. So we have to get back to productivity. And part of the problem with the enormous subsidy of the banks or of the corporate establishment is we're saying the average guy has a cost of capital that's 30 to 100 times higher than the big guys, and that's destroying productivity. The QEs, you're pumping money into highly unproductive sectors, and you're starving the productive sectors. And everyone in America and many people globally know we have to get back to what's productive, and we can't do that without bringing down this whole edifice of secrecy. And yeah, so I think Sanders and Trump are resonating.
And that's why the establishment, let's just call them the crony criminals that are running our government, that's why the establishment, the criminals, the cronies, the neocons on both Republican and Democrat side, that's why they're going crazy. That's why you see Republicans saying, well, we're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. What? So there is just one party, the crony party.
Nobody likes to give up their privilege. People get very attached to their privilege, and the reality is the dead party is over. So anybody who's not productive, and there are plenty of people in the establishment who are productive, there are plenty of people in the establishment who are not unproductive. The people who have a lot to be afraid of are the ones who are being subsidized, who are not productive. So you're seeing all across the board, anybody who's been on the gravy train on both sides of the aisle is saying, no, no, no. And that's why I think, as messy and organic as this conversation is, we need to have it. Because, Greg, there cannot be a successful civilization without fundamental values and principles. And if you have an elite that's just free to steal and kill and engage in lawlessness, no matter what, the economy will never work. That is the problem with the United States. Productivity has hit the boards, and you can't get productivity back unless you have a society where winners can win and losers can lose. Right now, the losers keep winning, and the winners keep being shunted to the side or killed or worse.
Yeah, you were so. I got to give you credit here. I mean, in 13, maybe 12. I've been interviewing you for a long time, but let's just start with 13. You won't crack. The economy's okay. I give it a few percentage points. I didn't think it would blow up in 14. It was an election year, and you didn't think so either. I really thought it was going to hit the crapper in 15, and you were could. And you gave it like 20 or 30%, something like that. I mean, it wasn't a big high percentage, but we did have a crash in China. But now, even in your own Solar report, and I don't know if people realize this, but you're an expert on the federal budget. In this report, you're talking about the economy, the U.S. budget, hot potato, and it possibly blowing up in 2017. David Stockman, the former White House budget director, he says the economy is going to blow up before the election cycle is complete. Give us your thoughts on basically the economy blowing up, that this whole Ponzi scheme coming unwound before 2017.
It's really a question of governance and leadership. There is, in theory, it's easily possible to manage through the election. It doesn't have to blow up. But if you look at what's going on in the campaign and in Washington, the leadership is blowing up. And if the leadership doesn't manage it properly, anything's possible, Greg. Now, I think what the global economy and what the U.S. economy needs is the rule of law. So if we have to have this conversation to bring an end to the secrecy and privilege and get back to the rule of law so we can support productivity, then I say, let's have a mess. I would rather deal with the fundamental issues of our civilization and our governance system now than later. So to me, the sooner we have these conversations and the sooner we get back to productivity, the better.
One of the biggest crony capitalists, Warren Buffett, I'm going to say it, he's incompetent. That man is incompetent. People, Warren Buffett, yes, you required a government bailout. You loaned money to Goldman Sachs. AIG needed a bailout, so Goldman wouldn't go under. You loaned money to GE at a high rate. They required a bailout. Wells Fargo, one of your companies. If it wasn't for the government bailout and crony capitalism, Warren Buffett would be an embarrassment in finance. And yet he says the economy is great.
What I will say is there's a covert side to Warren Buffett's operation, and there's an overt side to Warren Buffett's operation. And I think Warren Buffett is a very smart, astute investor, but I think his claim to success has come from the covert side, and that has never been looked at hard. So I think no one's ever looked seriously at Warren Buffett's operation. The one who scares me the most is Bill Gates, because I think part of what you're watching is one of the factions that's looking to basically run America as a criminal enterprise is Gates plus Buffett plus Clinton. That's the Democratic side. And I think one of the powers of Trump is he's looking at that vision for America And you've got a world of Americans saying, no, we don't want our children to be autistic from vaccines. We don't want our children to have their brains turned into mush by Common Core. We don't want the lawlessness and the crony capitalism that you guys stand for. And they're just saying, no, no, no. And, frankly, I don't want the software full of NSA backdoors that Bill Gates provides. So, I think there's an enormous rejection of that sort of criminal vision for America.
I think if they push Bernie Sanders out, they think that his voters are just going to vote for Hillary, and who may be indicted. I think she'll be indicted. I think they're going to vote for Trump. I think they're going to vote for Trump because I know Sanders is a socialist. I don't believe in any of that stuff he does, but he's right about the banks. He's right about the criminal enterprise of the banks. You can't have that. You've told me in the past that you think America is a criminal enterprise.
I would rather have a public servant who I disagreed with on every possible policy, because then we can have an honest conversation when you get into Congress. Bernie Sanders is a public servant. He has spent his whole life as a public servant. I don't agree with his policies, but I would rather have an honest public servant than a criminal. So the moral standards of the person you put into government matter tremendously. So I'm with you. I don't agree with Bernie Sanders a lot. The last thing we need is more government.
He's right about the banks, though. He's right about the banks criminal. I mean, they pled guilty to rigging LIBOR and rigging the Forex market and rigging every market under the planet. The mortgage scam.
Let me say one thing in defense of the banks. The banks have been running a hidden system of finance and a national security state, which is secret. And a lot of these things that look like criminality are something else. Now, you get a whole lot of criminality coming along with that, and it's destroying productivity. The whole process, because when I have to pay 30 to 100% to borrow, and a bank can borrow for 0%, nothing is ever going to work. Nothing will ever work, and it's what's destroying productivity in America. So I'm not justifying the system, but a lot of what looks like criminality by the bank, I believe, is running a hidden system of finance and the national security state, and that's why I say we got to bring the secrecy down.
Do you think that criminals are running our government right now?
Yes.
Period. We have a criminal enterprise basically running the government of the United States of America.
No, I would say the American government as a model is running the central banking warfare model globally, and it depends heavily on criminal profits. If you look at the general population, Greg, the general population supports that. That's what's important to understand if we're going to re-engineer this. I've told you the Red Button story many times on USA Watchdog. The general population supports that as long as they can pretend that they don't have responsibility for it. Because if you look at the criminality within the United States, the narcotics trafficking, the mortgage fraud, the stuffing innocent people into prison, that is being implemented one county at a time in 3,100 counties, and there are millions of Americans who are explicit in that. And there are millions of Americans who are getting paid to put a pretty face to it. So if you go to my website, I have a new commentary today called The Party's Over, and it's about how the African-American elite's gravy train in putting a pretty face to the fascism that's been going on in the Democratic Party. It's been going on in both parties. I'm not trying to be partisan about this. Their party's over because with people like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, you don't need a pretty face. They're willing to deal with reality, like him or not. So I think the party's, with the debt growth model over, the party's over for a lot of people who are unproductive.
Let's get specific on this re-engineering the budget. I mean, you say that, what is that, re-engineer the budget? And when David Stockman says, we're going to have bankruptcy, we're going to have default, we're going to have deflation, we're going to have assets going poof, we're going to have bonds going poof. Will you please talk in detail about what happens when we re-engineer the budget, or the thing crashes and we're forced to re-engineer the budget? What does it look like to the man on the street when you talk about re-engineering the budget?
Okay, well, remember, there are many different ways this can happen. I have an article called Coming Clean Beyond the Fiscal Cliff, and I really recommend everybody read it because it describes the different components of the federal budget and what the obstacles are. Now, there are 3,100 counties in this country, Greg, and if every county gets a hold of the federal budget, financial statements, contract budget, and regulations and program data for just their congressional district or their county, there are ways of re-engineering this budget so we all end up much wealthier. but it means we're going to have to change. So I've told you the stories when I was the lead financial advisor to the department or to the Federal Housing Administration. We would regularly find neighborhoods where you could buy and rehab a single-family foreclosed property for $50,000, but the government was spending $250,000 per unit to construct public housing. And I took that reality to the assistant of the person running the program, and I said, look, we could have 4 homes for the price of one in all these different neighborhoods in New Orleans and Chicago. And she looked at me, turned bright red, and said, but how would we generate fees for our friends?
Cronyism, criminal.
But let me give you another example. If in 37 states, if you call the customer support for food stamps, 25% of the people in Tennessee are on food stamps. If you call the customer support, you get a person working for JP Morgan Chase in India doing a job that if you were doing, you wouldn't need food stamps. So the government's paying you not to work, and they're paying somebody in India to do a job you could do, and they're giving JP Morgan Chase a markup. It's not economic. So I'm telling you, if we can re-engineer the federal budget place by place, because it's different in every town and county, if we can re-engineer it and add new technology, there is explosive wealth creation, but it means all this crony capitalism has to stop.
I want to get granular. I mean, what does it look like to the man on the street? Does his bank account close down? Does gasoline go to $10 a gallon? Are the store shelves cleaned out? How bad will this be what will the person actually see? Forget about the budget and looking at all that. What will that person on the street see when this gets ugly and crashes? That's really what I want to get at.
Well, but it depends on who's governing it. In other words, you can govern it in a way where there is an evolutionary process and we all have to change, but no one, there is a social safety net and things don't crash in that manner. You can also govern it in a way where everything crashes. So this is really, there is no fundamental economic problem here. There is a political problem here, and that's why you have to bring, there's $8.5 trillion missing from the federal accounts. Where did it go? How do we get it back? Because I'll tell you something, there's plenty of money, Greg. The people who stole the $40 trillion have it. They're very wealthy. They're reinvesting all over the country. And where they're reinvesting that money, where the financial coup d'etat won, they're doing very well. Things are going just hunky-dory. It's the old economy where the money's been stolen that's collapsing. So if you take $40 trillion and you move it over here into a new economy and you steal it from here, but you leave the liabilities back, then this is going to collapse and this is going to rise. So, the privileged class is rising and we're collapsing. And what I'm saying is, well, wait a minute. That's our money. We got to reintegrate this. So it depends on how it goes down.
Well, what happens if it goes down ugly and the political class says, okay, we're just going to crash this thing and, never let a good calamity or a good chaos or a good crisis go to waste. We'll crash it and people will be begging for martial law and begging for more government. Couldn't that happen? I mean, these are maniacal, evil, damn people.
In theory, it could. But remember, when you operate a system where you can manipulate and manage one by one through the smartphones and the cell system, you are much better having free-range totalitarianism than rounding everybody up and putting it in camps. It's much more economic. So
that's what the smartphone's all about. They're controlling you right with your little, stupid phones.
So free-range totalitarianism makes them money per person. Martial law and FEMA, all that stuff is very uneconomic. That's what they learned in Germany during the Nazis. If anything you can do to keep it free-range, because their economics depend on harvesting people, they want to keep the hamster on the wheel working. So collapse is very bad for the leadership.
But it could happen.
Could happen.
Could happen. I mean, David Stockman thinks it's going to happen. He says the whole thing's going to unwind before the election.
It could happen. It's what I call the mini thing. I used to have a pastor in Washington who used to scream, "God does not bless a mess." And we have a mess, a pyramid of lies, which goes on and on and on, and it's a mess. So could the mess implode? Yeah, it could implode. Now, here's the reality. If you look globally at where we're going, you know me, Greg, I think we're in a long-term bull market for the equity markets. I think the strength of the global economy one way or another is going to deal with this. It's there to be done. 7 billion people wake up every morning, and they only get paid if they make it work. That's a very powerful force. So, the world can go on out without the United States of America. The one thing the world cannot afford is if we bring the constitutional covenant down. And that's why I think the conversation that's going on in America right now is so important, because without the Enlightenment, when Ronald Reagan swore in Scalia, one of the things he quoted Daniel Webster, and he said, the Constitution is a 6,000-year miracle. It's a miracle, and it's a miracle, and if that miracle fails, there will be anarchy in the world. And so, to me, the most important thing right now is we need to reaffirm the covenant of the principles that we affirmed during the revolution, and we need to reaffirm those principles again. And the last thing we need is Mario Rubio or Jeb Bush or anybody calling for a constitutional convention to balance the budget on the backs of the people who just had $40 trillion stolen from them. We need to talk about, okay, well, where is that $40 trillion and how do we get it back? And that's why I wrote this for the annual wrap-up. It's like, wait a minute, that $40 trillion went somewhere. We have an ownership interest in it.
It's we the people, not we the cronies.
Right.
And I wanted to bring up something because I think I actually have people all the time. And a few weeks go by, I say this to some of my guests, some of my more regular guests, which you are one of them. And I have people on that will start asking for, bring back, one of the guests. And one of the people that gets asked for is you. And I think part of it is because you just have such an unusual, and I don't mean unusual if you're crazy, I mean unusual like, I didn't think of it that way. You're very smart.
Right.
And but you also have if we fix this, you're saying that you could unlock massive amounts of wealth in the U.S. It doesn't have to be this way.
The wealth potential is enormous. The wealth potential is enormous, but what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to reaffirm one of my favorite quotes from John Adams, he said, the war was not the revolution. The war was the consequence of the revolution. The revolution was in the hearts and the minds of the people and their assumption of their obligations to each other. So for people to take responsibility, they need to know the truth. And, the leadership for many, many decades now, Greg has said the American people are too stupid and too dumbed down to take responsibility, to understand what's going on, or be involved in solving the problems. I don't agree with that. I agree with Winston Churchill, tell the people. So if you tell the people what the real problems are and give them the tools, we have smartphones, we have computers, give them an app, let them download all the data on what's going on with government money and government credit within their place, and engage with them in how to build wealth, because the wealth potential that new technology can bring to productivity, where you have rule of law and where people believe that the economy will allow winners to win, where meritocracy is allowed to happen, where law is trusted. Wow, it could be incredible. It could be unbelievable.
You've also pointed out the losers keep winning, and the winners is having a hard time winning. But the losers, they are guaranteed to win, like Warren Buffett.
Congressman Grayson had a great series of interviews during the bailouts where he said, wait a minute, the banks can borrow for 0%, and, somebody on a credit card has to borrow for 30%. He said, go to your lender and try and get as much money as you want to borrow for 0%. He said, in capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose. And right now we have a system where losers keep being subsidized and winners keep being stolen, and harvested. And that is what has shut, if we have a deflation, both globally and domestically, Greg, that is what is causing it. The winners, the productive people have shut down. 3 years ago, I pulled my team together and I said, something? This economy is so dysfunctional that you and there's so much sabotage, there's so much economic warfare. I estimate I spend $100,000 a year just dealing with economic warfare, sabotage, and implosion. I said, we are going to identify every trustworthy person that we do business with, people of real integrity, and we are going to shrink this operation back to what we can do with only them. Because I've had it. We are going to be so picky about who we do business with because you cannot trust the general economy to either deliver, keep their word. You have an enormous debasement going on, and that is directly coming from the leadership and their policies. That has got to be changed. It's like my father was a surgeon. The body, when it goes into trauma, Greg. It sends the blood to the hearts and the lungs and the brain to protect, and it pulls the blood from the toes and the fingers. Right now in this economy, we keep sending the blood to the toes and the fingers and taking it from the heart and from the lungs and the brains. It's never going to work. But if you reverse that, wow, it's amazing what can happen.
And you are not a big Trump fan. You actually, like Kasich, you told me this in the pre-interview. But you are not a fan of Hillary Clinton. If you came down to voting for Trump or Clinton, who would you vote for and why?
Well, if it came down to voting for those two, I would write in, because I've been writing in for years for the presidency. But because I think I believe if enough people would write in, it would make an enormous difference. But if I had only the choice of those two, I would vote for Trump, because with Clinton, there's no hope. There is no hope. You're talking about a criminal enterprise leaving millions of people in this country unprotected and just harvested. There is no hope. And so, to me, Trump is a wild card. I don't think, I don't think the presidency of the United States is an entry-level position for anyone, let alone someone like Trump. But the reality is, even with a wild card, there's a 2 or 3% chance of an honest conversation and getting somewhere, and 2 to 3% is better than zero. So
he's asking the right questions. Trump? How do we make America great? I mean, Hillary Clinton, we'll make America whole. What the hell does that mean? A whole? What? You going to draw a circle on us? I mean, he's saying, make America great, which,
How do we make America great? It's the right question. The other thing he's saying is, you can't leave hundreds of millions of people unprotected while you protect your own little tuchus. That's not fair. And who would have thought that Donald Trump would be the one to ask that question? But I just think, Hillary Clinton is the no-hope solution. And that's not a solution.
Well, I think she'll be indicted. And she's on her way to being there. I mean, they've already given the guy that set up her private server last week immunity. So somebody's mad at somebody in that little evil hating on evil.
If you read the book Clinton Cash, it is there's two things you can say about America once you really understand what the Clintons have been up to for their whole career. One is, it's a miracle that they're not in prison now. Okay, and it shows you how corrupt America is that they're not in prison. But the second thing is, it shows you about the decency and goodness of the American people that they're walking around alive.
Yeah. I want to get into the Middle East. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I said that the Iran deal would be no deal. Trump says it's an embarrassment, incompetent. There is no deal. They handed him $150 billion with no signatures. And I know as an investment banker, you'd never cut a $150 billion no-signature deal. So there's no deal, according to the State Department. Second thing, that's going to ramp up hostilities in the Middle East. And here we have the Pentagon fighting with their army and their people they're funding in Syria. The Pentagon helping, according to Seymour Hersh, helping the Assad regime fight against the CIA's Al Qaeda and ISIS. And you have a huge split in America, and nobody is covering that. What in the hell is going on in the Middle East, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, number one, part of what's going on is that the U.S. national security state is making a pivot to Asia. The Middle East is less important. We're now domestically much more self-sufficient with oil and gas. And the U.S., if you look at what's going in Asia, they have to pivot. So part of this is we're moving our attention away. And if you look at why we did the Iran deal, I don't think they had any choice but to try and make a deal with Iran. I'm not saying it was the best deal they could have made, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have to shift our attention elsewhere. And so that's part of what's happening. I think the Middle East, there's more trouble coming. I think war could happen. And the reality is, everybody's got a vested interest in making sure it's contained with the Middle East. And the big problem for Europe is going to be the refugees are going to continue. So it's a mess. It's likely to get worse, and I don't see where the solution comes from.
Could this turn into World War III? A. B. Could it implode Europe? So first question, could it turn into World War III?
I think it's unlikely because cooler heads are going to prevail. There's always a chance. The big problem is what's it going to do to Europe, and whether or not the EU is going to have to reconfigure as a North European entity, which could be, it could destroy the euro. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's one of the things that's scaring the markets is the governance uncertainty there and here.
Could the derivatives of, for example, one bank like Deutsche Bank bring down the whole financial system? I mean, they got 70 trillion something in derivatives, and which is, I don't know, what is that, 15, 18 times the German economy?
Greg, it comes back to governance. Does it have to? No. If the governance continues to break down as badly as it is, anything can happen. So it really comes down to governance.
Derivatives could knock out the global economy, couldn't it? Couldn't they? If it's governed badly, the derivative overhang, the hundreds of trillions of dollars, could wipe out the global economy, could it not?
Here's what's going to wipe out the global economy. What's going to wipe out the global economy is distrust and secrecy and privilege. That's what's going to knock out the global economy. And if you look at where we're headed, it's got a 100% chance of knocking out the global economy unless you depopulate dramatically and create a world safe for the protected class.
That's what the depopulation is all about, because I get what you're telling us is that because once the entire world finds out, hey, 0.1% of the world's population have ripped us off, they should hang, and they're thinking, oh, no, we want to stay in power. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know what's going on at the top, but it was very interesting. If you look at what happened at Davos, from what little I could tell from the public media coverage, the leadership was kind of looking at the technology they've unleashed on the world and saying, oh no, what do we do now? In other words, they're afraid and they don't know what to do. And that's why I think what we need, the system is centralized way too much. What we need is to say on a decentralized basis, okay, how do we turn this around, but do it in a way that creates massive increases in wealth, which can be done. In other words, we're sitting on the precipice of massive wealth creation if we can get the governance right. And the reality is, I think it's going to have to be, that's why I believe in markets. You let markets work on a basis where winners can win and losers can lose. Wow, we can fix this. But it's going to require bringing down that secrecy.
And coming back to Syria, I mean, Kerry wants to partition Syria, and I can't see how that's going to happen with the Russians there in control of Syria. You're saying that could be contained. Even if tactical nukes start flying in the Middle East, you're saying that situation can be contained? So they all got nukes.
Anything can happen, Greg. But if you look at the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, and the Europeans, it's in everyone's interest to make sure that whatever happens, it is contained. No one benefits from it moving to a wider war. Not to say it couldn't, because again, when things go out of control, they go out of control. But it's a no-win for everybody. It's a lose, 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 lose.
Solar report. Let me just hold up your year-end. I want to make sure you get the cover on there. Tell us how people get the Solar report. You don't sell just the individual publication. You have a complete media network type of thing where you have interviews and you have publications, and it's really, really well done. Tell people how they can get the Solar report, this quarterly report.
Sure. Just come to solari.com, solari.com, and subscribe. You can subscribe monthly or annually. We have, right now we have a promotion. We get a hard copy of the annual wrap-up if you subscribe to the annual. What we discovered, Greg, is our subscribers are very busy. Their time is very precious, and what's going on wastes a lot of their time. So the idea, we do an annual wrap-up and a quarterly wrap-up, which are 4 of our most important publications, because the idea is you're busy. If you just read those 4 wrap-ups, you'll know everything that's going on in the global economy that affects your money and your time and the politics. And so it's really a way of condensing. So the annual report this year is terrific. We did, as you know, the space-based economy and what space means to you and why it's so important. So we go through a lot of the issues we're talking about, the federal budget, et cetera. So come subscribe to the Solari report. You get all the archives back to 2008. It's really a great deal.
You put a much better, brighter light on why the cronies want to stay in power. I always know they're cronies and they want to steal, and why there's no difference between the Democratic cronies and the Republican cronies, the crony class, because they want to keep ripping off the country, the world, and they want to keep their privilege. Basically what it boils down to.
Right.
And the
but
internet.
here's the
Go ahead.
there are a lot of people in the establishment who don't like that. In other words, if you look at who's for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it doesn't break down between the establishment and us. There are a lot of people in the establishment who don't like it. The question is, they don't know what to do. So part of this, of turning this around, is inviting the good guys within the establishment to be part of real solutions. And there are plenty of them, but they are frustrated and stuck just like the rest of us.
Well, this is why the technology of the internet is disruptive, because you and I can have this conversation and likely you get 60, 70, 80, 100,000 views or something like that. And people, movers and shakers, your enterprise, your media enterprise gets a lot of traffic and a lot of movers and shakers. And, all we can do is put the information out there and get people to, have that revolution in their minds, not with guns, but in their minds, their thoughts, and how we do business. Correct?
It's what John Adams said. The revolution was in the hearts and the minds of people. We don't need a new constitution. We need to enforce the constitution we have.
Catherine Austin-Fitts, there you have it. She is the heart and soul of the Solar Report, Media Empires. Catherine Austin-Fitts, thank you so much for coming on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg. It's a great show. USA Watchdog, great show. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on, spending half an hour and helping us out, more than half an hour, and giving us some real enlightenment and some analysis. As I said, and I believe this, that you really can't get anywhere else. Thank you so much for coming on USAWatchdog.com.
Bye.